When the expensive BMW of the Millionaire CEO broke down, he and his mechanics humiliated the elderly man with dirty hands who offered help. "Are you going to fix my car with that filth?" he mocked in front of everyone. The gentleman said nothing. He just opened his worn wallet and showed a single photo to the workshop manager. The manager's face turned pure panic. He grabbed the CEO's arm and shouted, "Boss, wait! For God's sake, wait!" The potent roar of Grayson's custom BMW was the soundtrack to his daily arrival at Empire Motors. That sound, guttural and finely tuned, represented more than a high-performance engine. It was the sound of power, of inheritance, and of a dominion he wielded without question. The luxury auto shop, with its gleaming epoxy floors and German tools organized with military precision, was less a business and more an extension of his ego. A fiefdom his father had left him along with a fortune that made him immune to the worries of ordinary men. On that hot afternoon, however, the symphony of power was interrupted by a metallic sob. The car jerked to a stop right at the shop's entrance, the engine letting out a sharp, agonizing squeal before falling completely silent. For a moment, the only sound was the whispering of the air conditioner inside the vehicle. Grayson slammed his hand on the leather steering wheel, his face contorting into a mask of irritation. To him, this wasn't a mechanical failure. It was an act of insubordination from a machine that had dared to defy its owner. The shop doors opened as if triggered by a silent alarm. Jonas, the manager, a man whose smile seemed permanently fixed to please, rushed toward the car, followed by a small troop of mechanics. They didn't move with the urgency of problem solvers, but with the reverence of acolytes approaching an altar. "Boss, what happened? Is there a problem?" Jonas asked, the concern in his voice aimed more at Grayson's mood than the state of the engine. Grayson stepped out of the car, adjusting his linen jacket. "This piece of junk just died. Fix it, now!" The command hung in the air, and the mechanics swarmed around the open hood, exchanging nervous glances and hurried theories, more worried about looking competent than actually being so. Across the street, sitting on a worn curb, an old man with a white beard and tattered clothes watched the scene in silence. His eyes, a surprisingly clear blue in his wrinkled face, analyzed every movement with an expertise that contrasted with his appearance. He rose slowly, his body stooping slightly under the weight of his years, and crossed the street, his steps slow and deliberate amidst the team's contained panic. As he approached, the smell of grease and honest labor that emanated from him seemed an offense to the sterile, perfumed environment of the shop. The mechanics fell silent, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. The old man, known in the neighborhood only as Clyde, ignored their stares and focused on the subtle hum the engine was still making, an almost imperceptible whine. "It's not the fuel injection," he said, his voice raspy but loaded with a certainty that made the air vibrate. "It's the seal on the supercharger. If you try to start it again, you'll blow the engine." Grayson turned, his gaze sweeping over the old man from head to toe with evident disgust. He focused on Clyde's hands, the nails dark and the skin cracked with grime. "And you're going to fix my BMW with your dirty hands," Grayson scoffed. And the sound of his mockery triggered the sycophantic laughter of the mechanics. "Get out of here, bum, before I have security sweep you out with the trash." Clyde didn't flinch. His blue eyes locked onto Grayson's, a spark of something ancient and powerful glowing within them. He ignored the insult, his calm disarming the aggression in the air. He seemed to see beyond the millionaire, beyond his wealth and power, seeing something no one else could. Faced with the old man's defiant silence, Grayson's anger boiled over. The public humiliation of his broken-down car was bad enough. Being corrected by a homeless man was intolerable. "Jonas!" he snarled, a vein throbbing in his forehead. "Did you hear what I said? Get this man out of here and start the car. I have a deal to close, and my time is worth more than this bum's entire life." Jonas swallowed hard, his smile finally faltering. He looked from his boss's furious face to the calm eyes of the old man, feeling an inexplicable chill run down his spine. The order was clear, but the stranger's warning sounded with the gravity of a prophecy. Grayson's order, sharp as a shard of glass, left Jonas paralyzed. On one hand, there was the survival instinct, the need to obey the man who signed his paycheck, the multimillionaire whose mood dictated the stability of his job and his family. Defying Grayson was professional suicide. On the other, there was the old man's warning. The words, "You'll blow the engine," were spoken with such quiet, absolute authority that they seemed less an opinion and more a law of physics. Jonas looked at the exposed engine, a marvel of German engineering, complex and temperamental. He didn't understand half of what went on in there. His job was to manage people and budgets, not gasket seals. His mind calculated the costs, the salary he could lose versus the price of a blown BMW engine. The latter was astronomically higher, an expense that would stain his record and would certainly come out of his performance bonus, if not his job. The other mechanics, however, didn't share his hesitation. Driven by fear and the desire to please, two of them were already moving toward the driver's seat. "No, wait," Jonas said, his voice louder than he intended. Everyone froze. Surprised, Jonas never contradicted the boss. Grayson himself glared at him, eyebrows arched in a mix of disbelief and fury. "Do you have a hearing problem, Jonas? I gave an order." The manager felt sweat trickling down his back. He needed to buy time. His eyes darted to Clyde, searching for some kind of salvation. The old man remained motionless, his gaze fixed on Grayson, impassive before the gathering storm. There was a dignity about him that money couldn't buy, a wealth of spirit that made Grayson's fortune suddenly seem vulgar. "Boss, it's just that maybe we should check what the gentleman said," Jonas stammered, pointing discreetly at Clyde. "Just as a precaution, the cost of a mistake here could affect our quarterly cash flow." He tried to appeal to the only language Grayson understood, business. Grayson laughed, a joyless sound. "A precaution? Based on a bum's advice? Have you lost your mind? Are you worried about the company's capital? Start the car and get this trash out of my sight." The scorn from the other mechanics returned, emboldened by their leader's certainty. "He must have mistaken it for a lawnmower engine," one of them said, and the laughter echoed across the lot. Ignored and humiliated, Clyde remained unshaken. His calmness was his shield. He stared at the CEO for a long moment, and then, with a slowness that drew every eye, he reached into the inner pocket of his worn coat. The movement was so deliberate that silence fell over the shop. There was no threat in his gesture, only an infinite weariness, as if he were about to end a play that had gone on for far too long. He pulled out an old leather wallet, its edges cracked and its surface faded by time and use. The disappointment was audible. They had expected something more dramatic. Grayson rolled his eyes, ready to call security himself, but Clyde didn't pull out any money. He opened the wallet with his grease-stained fingers, and from within, with reverent care, he removed a single photograph. The photograph, yellowed and with frayed edges, looked like a ghost from a bygone era. Clyde held it for a moment, his thumb gently brushing the image, an intimate gesture heavy with memory. Then, with the same slow, steady pace, he walked to Jonas. Completely ignoring Grayson's murderous glare, he held the photo out to the manager, who took it with visible reluctance, as if the object were as filthy as the hands that offered it. "Tell your boss to look at this," Clyde said, his voice low, but resonating with a weight that captured everyone's attention. Jonas glanced down at the photo, disdain still marking his features, and then the world seemed to stop. His fawning smile froze and then shattered, replaced by a mask of pure disbelief. The blood drained from his face, leaving him as pale as a technical manual. His breath caught in his throat. In the photo, a much younger Clyde, with the same piercing blue eyes and the same grease-stained hands, was smiling with pride. Beside him, with an arm resting familiarly on his shoulders, was a man whose face was a legend within Empire Motors, Mr. Arthur Vance, the company's original founder, the near-mythical genius who had built an empire from a small garage and an all-consuming passion for engines. Jonas saw that face every day, immortalized in an imposing oil portrait that dominated the main conference room, a symbol of the heritage and vision that supposedly guided the company. The man in the photo was, unequivocally, the same man in the portrait, and the young man beside him was, unequivocally, the bum they had been humiliating. At the bottom of the photo, an elegant, slightly slanted script read, "For Clyde, the best master I ever had. The heart of this company will always be yours." Master. The word exploded in Jonas's mind. The stories, the whispers from the older mechanics, the legends told in hushed tones about the company's founding. They spoke of an anonymous mentor, a mechanical genius who taught Arthur Vance everything he knew, the true brain behind the initial innovations. The man who was the soul of the shop before it even had walls. A man who, according to legend, disappeared after a personal tragedy, taking with him a knowledge that was never fully replaced. They called him Master Clyde. Jonas lifted his head, his eyes wide with panic, and looked at the old man, the white beard, the worn clothes, the hard life etched on his face. It was all a disguise for the legendary figure standing before him. Jonas's breath returned in a sharp gasp, a whimper of dread. Grayson, impatient with the drama, gestured sharply to the security guards who were now approaching. "Show's over. Take him away." "Boss, wait!" Jonas yelled, his voice shrill, almost unrecognizable. He scrambled toward Grayson, the photo extended in his trembling hand, as if offering irrefutable proof of a miracle or a catastrophe. "What is it now, Jonas? You feel sorry for the old man?" Grayson snapped, his arrogance intact. "No, boss, the photo," Jonas stammered, unable to form a complete sentence. "This man, he's Mr. Vance's master. He's the Master Clyde from the stories, the mentor, the one who disappeared." Grayson snatched the photo from Jonas's hand with an irritated flick of his wrist, ready to dismiss whatever it was as a cheap trick. His eyes scanned the image with disdain, but then they froze. The arrogance on his face crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. He looked from the photo to Clyde's aged face and back to the photo. The resemblance was undeniable. The glint in the eyes, the structure of the face beneath the wrinkles. It was all there. His grandfather's handwriting, which he knew from dozens of old documents and letters, was unmistakable. "The heart of this company will always be yours." The sentence hit him with the force of a physical blow. The blood that had fled Jonas's face now seemed to rush into Grayson's, turning it crimson with a mixture of shock, rage, and a new, terrifying feeling. Fear. The terror that gripped him wasn't the fear of a physical confrontation, but the existential dread of someone watching the foundations of his world collapse. His power, his authority, his very identity. It was all derived from his grandfather's legacy, and the man he had just called trash was, according to his own family's legend, the cornerstone of that same legacy. The security guards stopped, confused, sensing the abrupt shift in the atmosphere. The mechanics, who had been laughing moments before, now stared at each other wide-eyed, the weight of what they had done beginning to sink in. Mockery turned to shame, contempt to awe. The legend of Master Clyde was more than just a story to inspire the rookies. It was a founding myth, the origin story of Empire Motors' soul, and they had just spat on it. Clyde watched Grayson's reaction, his face showing no triumph, only a profound sadness. "Before he passed," he said, and his voice was no longer that of a tired old man, but of a long-dormant authority. It cut through the tense silence of the shop. "Arthur left me a letter, notarized. He feared that the passion that united us might be lost, that the business would swallow the art. He gave me veto power over any decision that, in my opinion, betrayed the soul of this company. Clyde's gaze swept over the pristine shop, the matching uniforms, the state-of-the-art equipment. I watched from a distance for years, while your father maintained the legacy. He balanced profit with honor. He understood that our true asset wasn't in our financial portfolio, but in the trust our customers placed in our hands. Then, his eyes fixed on Grayson again, and in them was a contempt so pure it made the young man take a step back. But you've turned a passion for cars into a circus of vanity. You don't care about engines, only about the shine on the paint. You talk about investment and returns, but you've forgotten the most important capital, craftsmanship. You and your men look at this machine and see a status symbol. I see a mechanical heart asking for help. Clyde then turned, ignoring the paralyzed CEO, and his gaze moved across the frightened faces of the mechanics until it landed on a young apprentice at the back of the group, the only one who hadn't laughed, whose face was burning with shame for his colleagues' behavior. You, kid, get my toolbox from the shelter down the street. It's time to show you how a real car is fixed. Clyde's order to the young apprentice, Leo, was the spark of a quiet revolution. There was no shouting, no arguments, just a heavy, dense silence that filled every corner of Empire Motors. Grayson's authority had evaporated into the hot afternoon air, leaving behind a vacuum that was immediately filled by the commanding presence of the old master. Leo, caught off guard, could only nod, his eyes wide. He looked at Jonas, then at Grayson, seeking confirmation, a counter-order, anything. But Jonas was staring at the floor, pale and mute, and Grayson looked like a wax statue, his face frozen in an expression of horror and humiliation. Receiving no objection, Leo took off at a run, the sound of his footsteps echoing the urgency and strangeness of the moment. Grayson's downfall was exactly like his rise, silent and absolute. He wasn't fired. No one told him to leave. He was simply rendered irrelevant. His fortune, his assets, his multi-million-dollar net worth suddenly meant nothing within these walls. He was a king in his own castle, suddenly turned into a ghost no one dared to look at. The mechanics, once his fawning watchdogs, now avoided his gaze at all costs. They cringed under Clyde's stare, a look that didn't condemn but saw right through them, measuring their worth not by what they appeared to be, but by what they knew. And in that moment, they knew very little. Clyde walked slowly to the BMW, the car that had started it all. He placed a hand on the still warm hood, an almost affectionate gesture. His fingers, stained by a lifetime of work, traced the lines of the vehicle. To him, this car was not a luxury object. It was a patient, a machine with a history and a problem that needed to be understood, not forced. He didn't need state-of-the-art diagnostic scanners or digital manuals. His expertise was in his hands, his ears, his instincts honed by decades of dedication. Grayson remained rooted to the spot, the photo still in his hand. He looked at the image of his grandfather smiling beside this man. He remembered the stories his father used to tell, stories about Arthur's brilliance, about how he built the company from scratch. But his father had never mentioned the central figure, the master behind the genius, perhaps out of pride, perhaps not wanting to diminish his grandfather's shine. Or maybe, Grayson realized with a chill, his father had known about the letter and the power it held, and had lived with the knowledge that his empire was built on a foundation that didn't fully belong to him. This man, this bum, had more right to the soul of this company than he did. With all his stocks and dividends, Leo returned, breathless, carrying a dark wooden toolbox, worn with time. It was neither large nor flashy, but it had the weight and solidity of something made to last. He placed it on the ground beside Clyde with a reverence normally reserved for a holy relic. Clyde knelt, his old body protesting with a crackle, and opened the box. The inside was lined with faded red velvet, and each tool rested in its own niche, clean, polished, and sharp. They were old tools, but they were immaculate. They were the hands of a master. With the toolbox open at his feet, an aura of absolute concentration enveloped Clyde. The outside world, with its humiliated CEO and terrified staff, seemed to fade away. There was only him, the engine, and the tools that were an extension of his own hands. He selected a screwdriver with a wooden handle, its surface smooth and polished from use, and began to work. His movements were economical, precise, and filled with a grace that belied his age. There were no wasted gestures, no hesitation. Every bolt was turned with the exact tension. Every part dismantled with a care that bordered on reverence. Leo, the young apprentice, watched mesmerized, kneeling at a respectful distance. For him, this was a masterclass, far superior to any technical training he had ever received. The other mechanics, who had previously crowded around with useless guesses, now formed a silent circle, watching in a mixture of shame and admiration. They saw in Clyde the personification of a craft they had forgotten, trading intuition and touch for a blind reliance on technology. In a few minutes, Clyde reached the supercharger, confirming his initial diagnosis. The gasket seal was indeed ruptured, a small but catastrophic failure if ignored. He removed the damaged part and, from a small compartment in his box, pulled out a new one wrapped in an oiled cloth. It was an original part, likely stored for decades, waiting for the right moment. As he worked, he spoke in a low voice, more to himself than to his audience, but Leo absorbed every word. "They don't make metal like this anymore," he murmured, comparing the new part to the others around it. "Today, everything is made to break, to generate more business. Arthur and I, we built things to last. Profitability came from trust, not from planned obsolescence." Grayson, still frozen in the same spot, heard those words and felt each one as a direct accusation. He had led the company based on quarterly profit reports and sales projections. The longevity of the cars was a problem, not a goal. A customer who was satisfied for too long was a customer who didn't buy a new car. That philosophy, which had seemed so logical and unassailable in the boardroom, now sounded shameful and petty in the face of the simple integrity of Clyde's work. After replacing the seal, Clyde didn't stop. His experienced fingers continued to explore the engine like a doctor examining a patient. His eyes narrowed. He touched a hose, felt a joint, and his expression grew serious. "Jonas," he said, without looking away from the engine. The manager jumped, startled to be addressed. "Yes, Master Clyde?" The title slipped from his lips naturally. Clyde pointed with the screwdriver. "How long ago did this car have its full inspection?" Jonas swallowed, trying to access the records mentally. "I think 3 months ago, sir." Clyde shook his head slowly. "The intake manifold gasket has a hairline crack. Tiny, undetectable by scanners unless you know what to look for. A few more days of heat and pressure, and it would have ruptured, injecting coolant directly into the cylinders. The engine wouldn't just have blown, it would have exploded." A shiver ran down the spine of everyone present. It was a severe problem, a potential disaster that the elite team at Empire Motors, with all their cutting-edge equipment, had completely missed. The silence that followed Clyde's revelation was deeper than any that had ever filled the shop. The possibility of such a catastrophic failure, overlooked by their supposedly flawless team, was a crushing indictment. This was no longer about a simple gasket seal or Grayson's humiliation. It was about competence, safety, and the very reputation of Empire Motors. Clyde, with the same methodical calm, proceeded to replace the faulty gasket. In a little over an hour, using only his hand tools and encyclopedic knowledge, he had not only fixed the initial problem, but had also prevented an imminent disaster. When he was finished, he wiped his hands on a rag he pulled from his pocket and closed his toolbox. The soft click of the latch sounded like a verdict. He stood up, his joints popping, and turned to face the team. "Start the engine," he said to Leo. The young apprentice, with a look of reverence, got into the BMW and turned the key. The engine awoke instantly, not with the arrogant roar from before, but with a smooth, powerful, and perfectly tuned hum. It was the sound of a machine in harmony with itself, a sound most of those present had never heard from an engine of that power. The perfection of the sound was undeniable. Clyde let everyone absorb the moment. Then he addressed them. His voice was not one of anger, but of a paternal disappointment that cut deeper than any shout. "You have the best tools money can buy. You have access to all the manufacturer's technical data, but you lack the essential thing. You don't listen. You don't feel. An engine talks. It tells a story about where it's been and where it's going, and you are all deaf." He looked at Grayson, who seemed to have shrunk inside his expensive suit. "This is no longer a workshop. It's a designer boutique, and I will not allow Arthur's name to be tarnished by it." Everyone expected him to pick up his box and leave, a ghost who appeared to teach a lesson and then vanish back into anonymity. Grayson, for a brief, desperate moment, even wished for it. But Clyde didn't move. This was the true turning point. The moment that would forever alter the course of the company and their lives. "I'm not going anywhere," Clyde declared, his voice resonating with unshakable finality. "Arthur gave me a right, and I have neglected it for too long, lost in my own grief. But my duty to him is greater than my pain. As of today, I invoke the right granted to me in that letter. I am assuming technical oversight of the entire Empire Motors network." A collective gasp went through the team. Jonas felt the floor disappear from under his feet. "My goal is not profit, nor your dealings on the stock market. My only goal is to restore the soul of this company." "Jonas," he continued, fixing his gaze on the manager, "you are promoted to general manager. Your first task will be to rewrite the code of conduct. And the first rule, the most important of all, will be: a man is judged by the quality of his work, not by the cleanliness of his hands." The declaration hung in the air, both a sentence and a promise. Clyde had just seized control of the empire, not with money or legal power, but with moral authority and a legacy that no one could contest. Grayson's fiefdom had fallen. In the days that followed, Empire Motors operated in a state of tense surrealism. Grayson, in a final spasm of wounded pride, tried to fight back. He locked himself in his office, the same one that had been his father's and his grandfather's, and spent hours on the phone with the company's battalion of lawyers. He demanded they find a loophole, a way to nullify the letter, to remove Clyde from his property. The words assets, inheritance, and equity were repeated with growing fury. The response, however, was unanimous and disheartening. The letter, which had been properly notarized by Arthur decades ago, was an ironclad legal document. It wasn't a will, but a lifetime consulting contract, granting Clyde veto power over all technical and operational decisions. His grandfather, in his wisdom and perhaps foreseeing the dilution of his values, had created an unassailable safeguard. Grayson was trapped. His vast capital could not buy him a way out. While he floundered in his office, Clyde acted. He didn't occupy the CEO's suite. Instead, he set up a small workbench in a corner of the main shop next to his toolbox. His presence was a quiet, constant force. He didn't shout orders. He taught. He started with Leo, who became his shadow, absorbing decades of knowledge in days. Clyde taught him to diagnose a problem by the smell of burning oil, to feel an abnormal vibration through the handle of a screwdriver, to understand the logic behind every component. He also began working with Jonas. The new general manager, still stunned by his promotion, spent hours with the old master at the end of each day. Clyde didn't talk about spreadsheets or profit projections. He talked about people. A good mechanic is your greatest asset, Jonas. More valuable than any piece of equipment, he would say. Your job is to give them the tools and the knowledge, yes, but also respect. A man who feels valued doesn't work for a paycheck. He works for pride. The first change implemented was radical. Clyde instituted a mandatory training program for all mechanics, taught by him. The first sessions were tense. The veterans, used to their methods and their hierarchy, resented having to learn from an old man. But Clyde's skill was so overwhelming, his understanding of engines so profound, that the resentment quickly turned to reluctant respect, and then to genuine admiration. He disassembled an entire engine in front of them, explaining the function of each part not with technical jargon, but with simple, passionate analogies. He was giving them back the art that routine had stolen from them. Grayson watched it all from a distance, through the glass window of his office. He saw his employees, who once feared him, now gathering around Clyde with a respect he had never been able to inspire. He saw passion returning to the work, camaraderie replacing sycophancy. It was like watching a stranger remodel his own house, making it better, stronger, and more authentic, and he was the only one who didn't have a key to the door. The nights in the shop grew longer. After the employees had left, when only the service lights hummed in the silence, Clyde would remain at his bench, not working on cars, but on memories. One evening, Jonas found him holding the same faded photograph, his gaze lost somewhere in the distant past. Hesitantly, the manager approached. "Master Clyde, are you all right?" Clyde took a moment to answer, as if returning from a long journey. He smiled, a sad smile. "Just visiting an old friend." He motioned for Jonas to sit on a nearby crate. "People look at this company and see a success story, a fortune built on business acumen. But it started here," he said, tapping the photo, with two young guys who loved the smell of gasoline and the sound of a well-tuned engine. And then, for the first time, Clyde opened a window to his past. He told Jonas how he met Arthur, both of them young mechanics in a dusty garage, dreaming of opening their own shop. Clyde was the raw talent, the intuitive genius who could make any engine sing. Arthur was the visionary, the dreamer who saw not just a repair shop, but an empire built on excellence. Arthur was the face, the deal maker, Clyde recalled. He understood money, investments, how to turn our passion into a sustainable business. I only understood engines. We completed each other. He built the walls, but I was the foundation. He described the joy of the early years, the sleepless nights, the thrill of every engine they saved, the reputation they built, customer by customer. They didn't seek wealth, but it came as a natural consequence of the quality of their work. The initial capital was reinvested, and the business flourished. Then, Clyde's voice faltered, the mist of memory turning darker. I had a daughter, Jonas, Liana. She was the light of my life. She grew up here in this shop. Arthur was like a second father to her. He paused, swallowing the pain that was still palpable after so many years. She got sick, a rare, aggressive disease. Arthur spared no expense. He used his fortune, contacted the best doctors in the world, spent fortunes on experimental treatments here and in Europe. For a while, we had hope. The silence in the shop was profound, filled only by the quiet sorrow of an old loss. But it wasn't enough. When she was gone, a part of me went with her. The sound of engines, which was once music, became an unbearable noise. Every car I fixed felt like a mockery, because I could fix machines. But I couldn't fix my own daughter. I couldn't stay here anymore. This place was too full of her. He looked at Jonas, his blue eyes moist. I left, disappeared. Arthur understood. He never stopped looking for me, sending me money that I never touched. He wrote me that letter before I left, as a promise that my place would always be here, waiting. But I couldn't come back. The confession explained everything. The pain in his eyes, His absence, his reluctance to engage with the world, returning to Empire Motors wasn't just about honoring a friend, it was about reopening the deepest wound of his life. Clyde's story spread through the shop, not as gossip, but as a reverent tale. The understanding of his suffering added a new layer of respect to his figure. He wasn't just a master mechanic. He was a man who had lost everything and still found the strength to return and honor a legacy. This realization began to break down the resistance of the most skeptical mechanics. They saw that his leadership came not from a position of power, but from profound integrity. Gradually, the training sessions ceased to be an obligation and became the highlight of the day. The veterans began sharing their own tricks and secrets, creating a collaborative environment that hadn't existed under Grayson's competitive, target-driven management. Clyde taught them to take pride in their work again, to sign off on every repair with the certainty that they had done their absolute best. However, the change was not without friction. A small group, accustomed to the generous bonuses that came from quick fixes and upselling unnecessary parts, resisted. They saw Clyde's methods as antiquated and detrimental to their personal cash flow. The leader of this group, a mechanic named Rick, decided to challenge the old master's authority. During a complex overhaul of a vintage car, he deliberately ignored one of Clyde's instructions, using a standard, faster procedure. Clyde, who was watching from a distance, said nothing. He let Rick finish the job. The next day, the car's owner, an influential collector and a long-time client, called furious. The car was sputtering, running worse than before. Jonas, in a panic, went to Clyde. The old master simply walked to the car, opened the hood, and in less than 5 minutes, pointed to a small valve Rick had adjusted incorrectly. "The manual says to calibrate it to 3.4 psi, Clyde said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But this model, from the E78 production run, had a factory quirk. Its soul asks for 3.2. The manual doesn't tell you that. Experience does." He made the fine adjustment himself. The engine immediately purred like a kitten. Rick, red with shame, was confronted not by anger, but by the silent disappointment of his colleagues. That incident solidified Clyde's leadership definitively. Meanwhile, Grayson continued his ghostly existence. Isolated in his office, he watched his empire being transformed and could do nothing. The irony was brutal. Under Clyde's management, the efficiency and quality of the work increased so much that profits, instead of falling, began to rise. Customer satisfaction skyrocketed. The metrics he valued so highly were improving without him. His identity as a business genius, the heir who multiplied his inheritance, was disintegrating. He was a billionaire in theory, but in his own company, his value was zero. He started drinking the expensive whiskey, his only solace, as he watched the man he had called trash rebuild his legacy with his own hands. The true trial by fire for the new Empire Motors came in the form of a crisis at its most prestigious branch, located in the heart of the financial district. The branch, which catered to a clientele of executives and tycoons, was Grayson's pride, a showroom of modern technology and efficiency. Suddenly, a series of the same luxury car model began exhibiting an intermittent and inexplicable electronic failure. The navigation and safety systems would shut down without warning, a dangerous and unacceptable problem for vehicles of that caliber. The problem escalated quickly. The local team, trained in Grayson's methods, replaced parts, updated software, and ran every possible diagnostic, but the fault persisted. The company's reputation was on the line. Furious clients threatened lawsuits, and the news began to leak to the trade press. It was a public relations nightmare and a financial drain, with the costs of the fruitless repairs piling up. Grayson, from his office, saw the crisis as an opportunity. It was a modern, electronic problem, something Clyde's old-school mechanics certainly couldn't solve. He tried to intervene, calling the branch, giving orders, suggesting expensive outside consultants. His attempts, however, were clumsy and ineffective, only increasing the panic of the local team. Jonas, following Clyde's advice, brought the problem to the master. Clyde listened patiently to the description of the symptoms, his eyes closed as if listening to the music of an engine. He didn't ask for computer reports. He asked for one simple thing: bring me one of the faulty cars. When the luxury sedan arrived at the main shop, Clyde didn't go to the dashboard. He had Leo open the hood and began inspecting the engine bay, not the electronic components, but the wiring harness, the grounding points, the physical layout of the cables. Grayson watched from his window, a smirk on his face. The old man was looking for a needle in the wrong haystack. After an hour of silent inspection, Clyde stopped. He pointed to a small bundle of wires running near the exhaust manifold. "Here," he said. "The insulating sheath on this cable is a new compound, designed to be more eco-friendly, but it can't withstand the extreme heat generated by this turbo engine when the car is stuck in heavy traffic. The heat degrades the polymer and causes an intermittent micro-short in the data bus. That's why the scanners don't catch it. The error isn't logged." The solution was so elegantly simple and analog that it left everyone speechless. Clyde developed a fix, a new routing for the cable and the application of a high-performance thermal shield. He taught Leo how to do it, and together they repaired the first car. The problem vanished. The solution was sent to the branch, and within 2 days, the crisis was resolved. Grayson watched it all, and the smirk on his face dissolved, replaced by a vacant expression. He hadn't been defeated by a business rival. He had been bested by a philosophy. His approach, based on data, efficiency, and component replacement, had failed miserably where Clyde's wisdom, experience, and observation had triumphed. The resolution of the crisis at the luxury branch was the final nail in the coffin of Grayson's authority. He was no longer even a shadow in his own company. He was an ignored spectre. The nights in his office grew longer and lonelier, the whiskey a more constant companion. On one of these nights, wallowing in self-pity, he began rummaging through the drawers of his father's old desk, searching for something, anything, to reconnect him to a time when he felt in control. Behind a folder of old stock reports, he found a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, with his name written in his father's handwriting. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a letter, written shortly before his father passed away. He had never seen it before. "My son," the letter began, "if you are reading this, I am already gone, and you now carry the weight of your grandfather's legacy, a legacy that is so much more than the assets and investment funds I have left you. There is something you need to know, something I never had the courage to tell you in life because of my own pride." Grayson continued to read, his heart pounding. "Empire Motors was not built by your grandfather alone. It was built by 2 men. The other was Clyde, a genius, a brother to your grandfather. I grew up watching them work together. Your grandfather's business genius was undeniable, but the soul of the shop, the magic in our hands, that all came from Clyde." The letter went on, detailing their friendship, the tragedy of Clyde's daughter, and his departure. "Your grandfather never fully recovered from Clyde's leaving. He made me promise that if Clyde ever returned, I would welcome him and honor the letter my father had given him. I kept the company on track, but over time, the pressure for profit and expansion pushed me away from their principles. I became more of a businessman and less of a mechanic. I saw that same trend in you, amplified. Your focus on wealth, on assets, on the outward shine. I encouraged it, because it was easier than admitting we were straying from the heart of the company." The last part of the letter was what broke Grayson. "My greatest regret is not being strong enough to keep the flame of Clyde and Arthur burning. I let it dim. Grayson, the value of a man isn't in what he inherits, but in what he builds with his own hands and his own character. I hope you find your way back to the soul of Empire Motors. It is the only inheritance that truly matters." His father's words, speaking from the grave, hit him with the force of a revelation. The arrogance, the anger, the resentment, it all dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming wave of shame and sorrow. He hadn't just failed his grandfather's legacy, he had failed his own father. For the first time in his adult life, Grayson cried. Hot, bitter tears from a man who had everything and possessed nothing. The next morning, for the first time in weeks, Grayson left his office. He wasn't wearing his linen suit, but simple jeans and a polo shirt. His eyes were red and swollen. He walked through the shop, past his employees who looked at him in surprise, and stopped in front of Clyde's workbench. The old master looked up from a carburetor he was cleaning. Grayson stood there in silence for a long moment, his father's letter in his hand. Then, in a low, choked voice, he said the hardest words of his life. "Master Clyde, can you teach me?" Grayson's request hung in the shop's air, as unexpected as a clap of thunder on a clear day. Leo, who was beside Clyde, dropped a wrench with a clang. Jonas, approaching with a clipboard, stopped in his tracks. Every mechanic at their workstation paused, turning to witness the scene. The deposed king was asking to become an apprentice. Clyde stared at Grayson for a long moment, his blue eyes searching the young man's face. He didn't see the arrogant CEO from weeks ago, but a broken man, stripped of his armor of wealth and pride. He saw the sincerity in his red-rimmed eyes, the vulnerability in his posture, and, perhaps for the first time, he saw a glimpse of the man Grayson could become. Slowly, Clyde nodded. "Learning begins with humility," he said, his voice soft but firm. "The first lesson is to clean. Take that rag and start cleaning every tool in my box. I want to see them shine." Without hesitation, Grayson picked up a clean rag and knelt on the concrete floor beside the toolbox. He began to clean one by one, the wrenches, the pliers, the sockets resting in the faded velvet. His hands, accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar checks and holding champagne flutes, were now covered in grease and oil. It was menial, humbling work, but he did it with a focus and dedication that surprised everyone, including himself. That act was the beginning of a long and arduous journey of transformation. Grayson didn't become a master mechanic overnight. He started from scratch. Clyde was a demanding but fair teacher. He taught Grayson not just the mechanics of cars, but the philosophy behind the work. He taught him patience, attention to detail, and respect for the machine. Over time, the dynamic at Empire Motors found a new equilibrium. Clyde remained the technical supervisor, the moral compass and soul of the company. Jonas, now a confident and respected leader, handled the day-to-day management, applying Clyde's principles of integrity to business operations. Leo became Clyde's primary protégé, a young master in training whose talent flourished under his mentor's tutelage. And Grayson found his place. He began to use his business acumen not to maximize profit at all costs, but to strengthen the company in a sustainable way. He invested heavily in training new talent, created a scholarship fund for promising young mechanics, and used his influence to promote a culture of quality and craftsmanship in the auto industry. He and Clyde began to work together, merging the old with the new. Grayson introduced smarter diagnostic technologies, but insisted they be used as tools to aid human intuition, not replace it. Clyde, in turn, learned to appreciate how modern technology, when applied correctly, could help preserve the longevity and performance of the cars he loved so dearly. The tension between them dissolved, replaced by a mutual respect and a reluctant affection that, over time, grew into an unlikely friendship. 5 years later, Empire Motors was an unrecognizable company, and yet more true to itself than ever before. Its reputation was no longer built on ostentatious luxury, but on unshakable trust and technical excellence. It became the place where the most difficult problems were solved, where cars weren't just fixed, but understood. The network of dealerships had expanded, but the growth was controlled, with each new branch opened under the strict philosophy that quality of work always came first. Clyde, his beard now completely white, still spent most of his days in the main shop. He no longer needed to work, as Grayson had insisted on setting up a trust fund for him, ensuring a retirement more comfortable than he could ever have imagined. But Clyde didn't retire. His passion was his purpose. He became the master mentor, a legendary figure guiding a new generation of mechanics, including Leo, who was now the head of the shop and one of the most respected specialists in the country. Jonas was the CEO, a leader who masterfully balanced profitability and integrity, ensuring the company thrived without ever selling its soul. And Grayson, he found a kind of happiness and fulfillment his old fortune had never provided. He was still the owner, a man of immense wealth, but his identity was no longer tied to his bank balance or his stock portfolio. It was tied to the legacy he was helping to build. He spent less time in boardrooms and more time in the shop, his hands often stained with grease, arguing with Clyde over the nuances of a classic engine or the challenges of a new hybrid system. On a sunny afternoon, much like the one that had changed everything, a cocky young man pulled his flashy Ferrari to a stop at the shop's entrance. "Weird noise from the engine," he said dismissively to the receptionist. "Hope your dirty-handed mechanics know what they're doing." Grayson, who was nearby, overheard the comment. The old Grayson would have been enraged. The new Grayson smiled. He walked over to the young man, his hands in the pockets of his coveralls. "Dirty hands," he said calmly, "usually mean a clean conscience and an honest job. Let me take a look. My master and I will take care of it." He opened the hood, and moments later, Clyde joined him, passing a wrench to his improbable student. Together, the old master and the transformed billionaire began to work, side by side, the harmonious sound of their tools blending with the smooth hum of the engine. The heart of Empire Motors had not just been saved, it now beat stronger and truer than ever before,